Meet Sidney Rayburn. He was born in Tennessee in the year of 1932, which makes him approximately 83 years old today. This is Sidney's home. He is currently residing at Carmen Oaks, the Springs Assisted Living Center in Lake Oswego, Oregon. This retirement home is located in the Westlake neighborhood. On May 18th, I got the opportunity to sit down and get to know Sidney Rayburn. His main living area is pictured. The interview began with Sidney explaining the family situation that he grew up in. Growing up, what was your childhood like?
Childhood was real nice. I did have a stepbrother and a stepmom, and we learned to cope together, and we were all loved as a family. And
On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, located in Hawaii. Sidney shared with me his personal anecdote regarding this event.
I want to emphasize when I was in grade school, we had just moved down to Florida from Tennessee, and got established, got settled in year 1941. And so it was one Sunday I was out playing in the yard, and I wasn't noticing anything too much, and I was just by myself. And I saw a lot of the neighbors scurrying around. They were going from one home to the next, and the houses were pretty close together. You wouldn't have to go very far to be in a neighbor's yard. And I did not know what the commotion was. And it seemed to be getting worse all of a sudden, within, say, 10 or 15 minutes. So I ran back in the house and told my mom, I said, the neighbors are going frantic. They said that Pearl Harbor's been bombed. And where is Pearl Harbor, Mom?
How old were you?
What part of Florida is Pearl Harbor? And I thought, the way they were getting, the neighbors were getting so excited. I thought, sure,
it's close by.
It was real close.
How old were you at this time?
I was 9. I was 9.
Oh, you were 9. Okay.
So anyway, my mom said, calm down, it's overseas. Pearl Harbor, it's not in Florida, it's not even in the United States. So just calm down. And so I did. It seemed like that's one of the outstanding things that I've always remembered.
In contrast to the Vietnam War, which would not occur for a couple decades, World War II was extremely supported by the American public. Soldiers were glorified by most people as heroes, and growing up during this time had a strong effect on young men's future enlisting in the military. Sidney later described his decision to join the military and what affected it.
Of school, I decided I would join the military. All the men graduating from school, that was their thing that they wanted to do. And plus a draft, there was a lot of boys being drafted. So I joined the Navy and went off to Korea. I served in the Korean War. I was 4 years. Then I got out for a short time, and I wasn't very happy, so I decided I would enlist in the Coast Guard. So I enlisted in the Coast Guard, and
Sidney was a member of the Coast Guard while in Vietnam, so he was not directly involved in combat like the Army was. This made it so he was rather distanced from his targets and did not get to see the full effect of the war. He explained to me about his experiences in the Coast Guard.
Vietnam War. And I was in the Coast Guard, and we were eventually we were sent overseas, and we were operating with the Navy. We were part of defense. We still had our own ships, had our own money quotas per month and so forth, but we more or less fell under the orders that the Navy gave us. And I was there in 1969 and for about a year. And we were gunfire support in that area, South Vietnam, and also we assisted the Navy swift boats, and the Coast Guard had some small 82-foot boats, and we assisted them with food and fuel, and we made lunches for the young fellows that were on the swift boats. That's the Navy guys, and then the Coast Guard, we assisted them too with sandwiches and made sure everything was okay. Small arms ammunition we gave them, and during that time we'd be on a barrier patrol where we were shooting into over across the demilitarized boundary, and so we had a night gunnery exercises, and also during the day we would shell the beach. So.
After the war, many American soldiers experienced PTSD, depression, substance abuse, or other psychological problems due to their horrific experiences. However, this was much less common in the Navy or Coast Guard due to the fact that they were not specific targets and they were more detached from seeing violence directly. Sidney was not, however, oblivious to the struggles that the war placed on some members of the military, as he explained to me.
Do you think students should be taught from their perspectives, or should that part of it not be taught?
It should be brought up.
Yeah.
It should,
Yeah.
be mentioned. One of the big disasters of war is the wounded. And what the wounded men and women have to live with.
Do you personally know anybody who's been wounded or mentally harmed?
I knew a few, not many, but I wasn't that close to them, but I knew of them.
Yeah, because you were on
the same units, on the same ships.
If there was something about the war that Sidney could identify as a positive, it was the wealth of knowledge and learning of a trade that he used for his whole life.
Had gotten my time in, and so I decided that I wanted to get out. I wanted to, retire. So after 22 years, I did get out of the military. And
So this was like your profession,
that was really
for 22 years.
Yeah, really my profession.
Okay.
And the way I learned a trade out of it was I was a stationary fireman and stationary engineer on steam power plants. And I had worked there aboard ship as a watch standard, and then I used that for working in these power plants, especially around New York.
Oh, okay.
And
Sidney told me that he easily found a job after the war, but this was not the case for many veterans. Sidney may have gotten lucky, but around 250,000 men could not find a job for many years. 21,000 were left so wounded that they were unemployable for life. This created a problem because without proper medical coverage, little governmental support, and no jobs, many veterans couldn't even get health care. Also, many social changes in American thinking that had been brewing throughout the 1960s caused the American public to not put as much support into the war. When the veterans returned, they were left to fend for themselves and were not greeted with victory parades or glorified as they had been in the past, despite their struggles or the fact that many had been drafted. It was not until the 1980s that society and the government began to honor and support the soldiers' medical needs.
So the Vietnam War was the most recent war with a draft. So what were your views on our involvement in the Vietnam War, or did you have any, or what was your opinion on that?
Well, I kind of wondered why we were, really fighting in the war, but it was more like, to me, it was more like a Korean thing. It was just a conflict, and we had our boundaries that we more or less stayed in,
Yeah.
without getting too much. We didn't want to get into a total all-out war, a World War III or anything.
Yeah.
Often, fighting in Vietnam seemed like an upward battle with no set destination. Due to an unclear outline and no visible goal, men blindly did as they were told and lost touch with themselves in the process. In his final remarks, Sidney Rayburn reflects on the effects of the Vietnam War and explains his thoughts for the future.
We should take from this experience. Or what can we learn from it, maybe?
Well, it was a big thing. It's always been, as time goes on, is try to keep the peace. Try to, stay friendly enough where we really won't get into a war.
Yeah.
Any way we can to try to avoid, resolve things peaceably. That's what I would try to emphasize and preach those values to my fellow shipmates.